Just hopefully.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We'll call the meeting of the Development Committee of July 11th to order, and a roll call, please.
Member Krajewski. Member Chaplin. Here. Member Guston. Here. Member Ozok. Here. Member Rutledge. Here. Chair Tornatori.
Here. And we have a quorum. Is there any public comment?
No.
I have nothing under chair remarks. Paul, as you can see, is not with us. He has COVID. I thought COVID was all over. Well, how'd you get it so late? No, on a vacation. But welcome. Hope you're feeling better, Paul.
Thank
you. And we'll move on to the minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of June 20th, 2023. So motion and a second. Any additions, corrections, or deletions? Hearing none, seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
And the minutes are approved. Moving into discussion, our only item, this is a discussion about exploring the potential for a grass cutting ordinance in the unincorporated areas of DuPage County. Member Eckhoff, who's here, brought this to my attention. Apparently one or two of his constituents have called him regarding an exceedingly high grass in their yards and whatever, and asked if there was a county ordinance regarding how high grass can be before it needs to be cut. And we found out we don't have one in the county. Apparently, historically, townships have dealt with this from time to time. So I'm not sure exactly how that dovetails, but I thought it'd be important to put it on the agenda. It was a light agenda. We can talk about it for discussion purposes. Paul will give us a little history of what we need to do, and then we'll get a sense from the committee about what we want to do if we want to take it any further. So Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
So there is what's called a property maintenance code that the county adopts, and that code comes out every 3 or 4 years. We are currently working under the 2021 International Property Maintenance Code. That jives also with some of our building codes. They all come from what's called the IBC, or International Building Code. In that property maintenance code, there are provisions for cutting weeds. They're under section 302.4 weeds. And historically, what the county has done when we readopt the property maintenance code, we actually delete that section from enforcement. So the important point is that there is a code that is available to us. I can read it to you, but we have historically deleted that section from enforcement. The reason that we have historically deleted that section from enforcement by the county is and I think most importantly, because of the wide swath of properties that the county covers throughout, anywhere between 37 and 40 communities, it has been determined to be almost cost prohibitive for us to enforce a weed cutting or grass cutting program. So that's historically been the reason why we haven't done it. There are some things that have changed a little bit that might mitigate that, and I'll get into that in just a second. The second thing that has sort of mitigated that is that many of the townships have weed cutting programs. So historically, when there has been a weed, we turn them over to the township, and typically the township will send out what's called a 30-day notice. And after 30 days, if the property owner, 30-day notice saying, your weeds are at a certain height, and that's a violation of the local township statute or ordinance or resolution. And if you don't cut those weeds within a certain amount of time, typically another 30 days, so a total of 60 days total, then the township will come out, cut the weeds, and then lien the property. And typically the township will cut weeds on properties like that 2, maybe 3 times a year if they're really, really bad. So that program's been working very well for the county. Sometimes it's been difficult for the townships to get out there in a timely manner let me back up there. In a manner that we think is timely, but is something that's certainly consistent with the township's programs are. It may not suit our constituents' needs, but the townships typically do go out and cut them, but it might not work to the benefit of what the county board members might want to see. Essentially, the weed cutting ordinances that are out there and that come from the International Property Maintenance Code essentially say that if you don't cut your weeds within a certain amount of time, Typically it's 30 days. That number is arbitrary. We can, if we wanted to, we can pick any time period we wanted. And then also the height of the weeds or grasses is arbitrary as well. The International Property Maintenance Code actually has that left blank. A municipality or government can choose what height level they would want to start sending notices out. Typically, the height level is anywhere between 8 and 10 inches. Bottom line is that, once again, historically, the cost to do this across the entire county is problematic. There is the township governments that do this. There are one of the things that the county is working on right now through our Clean and Lean program is we have applied for a grant from the Illinois Housing Development Authority and for $750,000. A part of that money includes $100,000 for grass and weed cutting on properties that we've deemed are clean and lean properties. So if we are able to get that money, there would at least potentially be some funding sources for us to work with the townships to help them with their programs, perhaps work with some of our own departments who do weed cutting or grass cutting for the county, such as Public Works and Stormwater, and even transportation, or perhaps develop our own program where we hire outside contractors to do grass and weed cutting. One of the things that we've talked about historically internally in our office is creating a program where maybe we don't, if we were to engage in a program like this, we wouldn't necessarily cut all of the grass on the property because many of our properties that are problematic are larger than the typical residential properties or even commercial properties in a municipality. And maybe we create, if there was an appetite to do this, we could create a program where we would just cut the setbacks. We wouldn't cut the entire property, but we would cut the setbacks. Where we've gotten that concept from a little bit is on some of our clean and lean properties where we actually have gone in, cleaned the properties up and cut some of the grass and the weeds as part of a clean and lean court order. We've cut the perimeter of the property, the setbacks of the property, and left the interior of the property to grow. But that's helped out with neighbors who are concerned about weeds and grass cropping over into their properties. So there are some things that we can do if there's an appetite for the county board to do those things.
Well, I had a basic question. When you say weeds, weeds and grass are presumably mean the same thing in the property maintenance code?
Yeah, the definition of it's termed weeds on the property maintenance code, but the definition of weeds includes noxious weeds and grasses. And there's a point at which grasses that are not decorative, ornamental, or part of a landscaping scheme on a property, that those are deemed weeds by the property maintenance code. And obviously we'd have to make sure that if we were going to do something, we'd have to make crystal clear that we would not be cutting ornamental or prairie grasses and things like that. That's one of the issues that we've come into before with some of these clean and lean properties, is that the property owners have indicated that those grasses are ornamental, they're prairie, and they shouldn't be cut down. So we sort of came up with this concept that we would just cut the setbacks, the perimeter of the property, so that we wouldn't be destroying a native prairie area, but we'd be cutting back so that the grasses, the tall grasses, weren't having an impact on line of sight or cropping over into other residential properties. But technically, weed includes noxious and high tall grasses.
And if we were to use, if we had an appetite for this and were to use the money, assuming we got it from item under the Clean and Lean program, in order to meet the requirements of the Clean and Lean program, we'd have to cite the property owners first, I would presume, take them through the entire process, adjudication or otherwise, end up with a finding so that we could then institute the clean part of the Clean and Lean program with the grass cutting, just like we do when we clean up property. And if that in fact is true, by that time, the grass could be 3 feet tall. because it's going to take time.
That's correct. There's two ways to go about that. Yeah, there's two ways to go about that. We could include it in the Clean and Lean program. And the idea of including it only in the Clean and Lean program is that that's saying to the public and the county board members and staff that it's only in extreme exigent circumstances that we are invoking this situation, as opposed to a typical grass cutting ordinance where we just have the ability of if grass gets to a certain height, we just issue a violation notice and give them 14 days to bring the property in compliance, take them to adjudication, which that whole process could take probably a month and a half, and then get an adjudication order for us to go out, for the county to go out and cut the grass. That's a little bit, arguably, that's one of the reasons why we haven't gotten into the program, because we could end up cutting a lot of grass on single family residential properties that have houses on them and they just haven't gotten around to cutting their grass. Or we could put it into the Clean and Lean program where we'd only be cutting grass and weeds where it became a very exigent emergency or an exigent circumstance where not only was there not grass being cut, but there are other symptoms going on the property like hoarding or property maintenance issues with the building, or people just, the properties were vacant and abandoned. So there's two different iterations that we could approach it with. Once again, just a normal grass cutting ordinance, or putting it into the Clean and Lean program where it's a emergency situation or exigent situation because there's other things going on the property.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll turn it over to anybody who's got any questions. We'll start with Sarah.
Thank you. I'm glad that you asked the question about weeds versus grasses. I used to live in an unincorporated neighborhood, and we had this huge ditch in front of the house, and instead of putting tiling in there and then making the lawn, even, we put a bunch of cattails with decorative prairie grasses. But my questions are this. You said that there was a lien under the township ordinances. There was a lien. How much is the lien if somebody has to if the township had to?
So typically what the township government will do is they'll, typically what the townships will do is they will send a letter out. Typically it's a 30-day letter saying we've had an inspector go out, found that your grass exceeded a certain height under our standard that requires you to cut them. If you don't cut them within typically 30 days, then the township will send its grass cutter out and cut the weeds. And so the administrative costs of sending an inspector out, processing the paperwork, and then the cost of actually cutting the weeds, that will all be totaled up. And there might be a fee or fine associated with that. Then is invoiced to the property owner. And if the property owner doesn't pay that within a certain amount of time, the township will lien the property. And that will include administrative liening. So it's typically, what I've seen, it's typically about $100. The cost to cut a residential property in the county is anywhere between $40 and $50, or maybe $60, depending on the size. And then there's administrative cost. So they'll lien the property, and then depending on, typically they won't foreclose on those liens because those liens are not, they're too small. But if the property has a mortgage on it, then the mortgage company will get in touch with the property owner and say, you got to pay this lien off. But that's typically how it works with the townships.
Thank you, Paul. My second question is this. Who enforces it or polices this? Who drives around and points out that Chip?
The
Township.
Yeah. The township polices it and or just neighbors who complain to their
Currently, it's the township.
county board members?
A lot what'll happen is that the neighbors will call, they'll either call their township government. A lot of people in the unincorporated area aren't acutely aware that their government is the county. A lot of people in the unincorporated area believe their only government is the township government, or no government at all. So a lot of times when there is an issue about something with roads or grass, they'll reach out to their townships right away. But in the event that they do call the county, then the county will take that complaint in and turn that over to the township, and then the township inspector will go out and make the inspections.
In my recollection of my days as a township trustee is we actually had a weed commissioner.
Oh,
Yes.
really?
And he got like $25. a
Different
month.
Oh, my
thing
God.
today.
To go,
Okay,
to
my
go
final
around.
question is this, would this be a cost neutral thing for the county? Or would it be a revenue making business for the county?
It would not be a revenue-making business. Historically, the concern was that it would be a cost deficit because we would have to pull money from our budget. We're an enterprise fund, so we'd have to pull it from our budget, and our budget is based on getting permit fees in. One of the ways, as I mentioned earlier, that we could potentially mitigate that is that if we do get the grant from IDA, that it could be up to $100,000. We could use that $100,000 as a budget, as the grass cutting and weed budget. But we would not make money off of it. We would invoice for the cost of administration and also invoice for the cost of cutting, and potentially leaning the property. But it would be neutral.
Thank you,
I'm
Paul.
gonna work
Thank you,
my way
Chair.
around this way. So Mary, you're next.
Okay, thank you. My impression is that this is a problem that should stay with the townships. I'm noticing even in the manicured lawn area of Glen Ellen, a lot of people are starting to turn their lawns into various lawn grass, prairie plantings, et cetera. And, you know, to be honest, while it may seem ornamental, some of them have just kind of let it go. And I think Glen Ellen has a 6-inch weed ordinance, which is not being enforced, which I have no problem with. And really the main issue to me would be safety, which would mean right of ways, which we already would have authority over a parkway or a right of way. But also, I think we really would just want to deal with this if it's a real hazard, dumping, vermin, et cetera. And I think leaving this with the township is a good idea. I don't see us getting involved in this. And I have to believe that generally if people are living in more rural or less developed areas, they're going to expect that there's not going to be that kind of same weed maintenance. So I'm happy to keep things as the status quo for the county.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree, except for the fact, do we have a written agreement or a resolution or some type of written agreement with the townships? And if we don't, we probably should, so that they know that we're not doing it and that they should do it. And also, most municipalities and towns, villages are complaint-based. And so, you know, it's not like you need somebody driving around from the county to go, this one, this one, this one. Typically, the neighbors will let you know when they're unhappy, and that's when action takes place. So, I mean, at a minimum, I think we should have some type of agreement with the township that they're gonna do the job, and when we get the complaint, transfer it down to them, because that's really, you know, it's in their wheelhouse.
Paul, do we have a historical intergovernmental agreement, or is this just something that's always been?
We do not, not that I'm aware of. There's just a general understanding that because the townships have these weed commissioners that typically come out of the supervisor's office, that it's just part of the township government. But I don't believe there is any intergovernmental agreement between the county and the townships. In addition, just to be clear, that if the county were to do anything, the code enforcement process that we have on hand is that we currently promulgate is reactionary. We just don't have the manpower to be scouring through neighborhoods on a daily basis to find code violations. And as the member indicated, that most, if not all, of our complaints that come in on general code enforcement issues, whether they be building, drainage, or zoning, are all complaint based, either from the township governments or from the cities or from the neighborhood. So even if we were to create a program, we would not envision that we would have a weed commissioner that would be going out looking for these issues. It would all still have to be complaint based.
And do all the townships have weed ordinances?
Not all of them. I don't have the information available right now, but we'll certainly get it to you. We'll get you all of the townships that do have the weed ordinances, what they are and how they, where they come out of. I think the ones that do, they run them out of the supervisor's office, but we'll get that information over to you so you can get an idea of what townships do have them. And how.
I think it's anybody's thought process here that we're gonna hire somebody to go out and just look for it. I mean, this would be a complaint-based type of situation like we do with everything else, or most
Right. Absolutely.
yes.
Thank you. So I agree with Member Ozak. I think leaving it with the townships is the right, I live in the unincorporated area thing. And I think, we've had the township out, I mean, not for grass necessarily, but when there's, trees that are blocking the, that have overgrown, they come out immediately and take them out for us, and they come and pick up our, all the garbage they take away. So I think that this really does fall under there. And also, if the county were to put in some kind of ordinance, but for example, behind my home, there's a pond, a retention pond that the county owns, that then they would, they come out and mow it every once in a while. It doesn't ever get high, but then, then would you have to go out and make sure that all of the properties that we own in those unincorporated areas too are kept, at a certain level, which could be costly for us. So I'm comfortable where.
Well, there would certainly be exemptions. If a program were developed, there would certainly be.
Okay, because I'm like, there's a lot of properties that could have impact. So, yeah, I think leaving it where it is.
There would be exemptions for government properties. There'd be exemptions for properties of a certain size, over a certain acreage. So absolutely, there would have to be exemptions if we were to do anything.
Brian.
Yeah, thank you. I can only speak from Downers Township, and I'm sure other townships are like that, but we get the complaints, or I get the complaints with the weed being high in the unincorporated areas. And they call me, and of course, it's gonna get it to the township. Had one 3 feet high in the yards. And as you said, Paul, the supervisor's office usually has the weed person there. So I call there, and it literally takes them a couple weeks before they'll even go out and inspect the property. And then I complain to the supervisor, like, well, it's, he's got other things to do than that. And he goes, we need to go out there and see it first. I go, I'll shoot you a picture and send it to you. I'm like, you have your highway guys? They're out on the road all the time. Can't they just drive right by there? And I know you mentioned, Liz, they pick up your brush. That's the highway people.
Oh, I know.
But the supervisor is the one that's got the weed side of it.
Right.
And so then they send a 30-day letter after it takes them 3 weeks to get out there. I've been working with Downers to let at least the highway guys snap the picture. If you get a complaint that this house has got 3 feet, 2 feet, whatever, let your highway guys see it so you at least know it, so you can send a letter out and then start the 30-day process. But trying to Downers, it takes 3 months before they'll even finally get it taken care of. Part-time guy who's so busy doing everything else, the last thing he cares about is going out to inspect the property. And figured, they're gonna call the county anyways, it's not. It's Downers, it's just, to get those guys to do it.
So what's your solution?
I don't know what the solution is, I just keep calling them, and eventually
You make an ordinance countywide and then say to the highway
I snap
commissioner and
pictures
then
and send them
get
to the
you
supervisor,
done,
I'm
or do
like,
we not?
well, do it. And maybe they ask Andy
Or
to go out there and,
agree.
but the highway people, these townships are driving by all the time. They can easily, if they get a
Detour.
complaint, but to get them to coordinate again, I think hopefully Downers have started to do that finally, but it's just years of getting them to get it done. It's the last thing they want to do.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, I have had this situation in my immediate neighborhood, actually, vacant property, went unmowed for about 1.5 years. Finally, the neighbors complained. The township did come out and mow it, lean the property, just how everybody has said. So I'm with Mary and Liz that I think that the townships are handling this. The other thing is that the townships are pretty sensitive to the county stepping on their authority. And I don't think they'll take this well.
That's assuming, and that would have been my other question. Whose authority is it to do this? Is it the county or the township? I'm not sure who has the right, Counselor.
Both do.
Oh.
The county's code gives us the right to, the township code gives them the right to.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm fine with you know, being able to maintain contact with my township office and take care of these issues without,
I mean, if it's the township's authority to do that, it somewhat gets us off the hook when somebody calls
Yeah.
us with a complaint. Say, well, you know, it's the township's responsibility.
I do believe it was $100 that they found, so.
Mr. Chair.
Lucy, did you have a question? I'm working my way around.
I'm agreeing with everybody else.
All right, I'm gonna go to
Overly
member
Yeah.
Eckloff because he was the one who brought this to my attention.
Yeah.
The one
And
that started the meeting.
you
sorry.
started this whole fiasco, so now it's up
Let
to
me
you.
just give you the long and short of it. Mary and I and Lynn, I think all three of us received an email from a constituent at 23W266 Windsor Drive. Anyway, she said that the person who lived there died in 2018, that the property regularly goes unkept and gets the high lengths. And sometimes one of the neighbors gets sick and tired of doing it and they cut it down. Paul, I can't remember, did you call Milton Township and ask them if they had driven by there, gotten the complaint, or? whether or
Yes.
not- do they
Yes.
do anything, or do they choose not to do anything?
I don't know the answer to that, but they are aware of the weed complaint on that property. And it's my understanding that they are looking into it. Now that's looking into it over the course of 60, 80, 90 days here, but they are aware of it.
Okay, so anyway, the county has got multiple intergovernmental agreements with municipalities to allow the municipalities to cut unincorporated county property. For example, on Naperville Road, it's a county highway. The Wheaton residents would get regularly upset that the county wasn't cutting the grass often enough. So we did an intergovernmental agreement, and we do a number of them every spring with municipalities to let them cut our grass and then we pay them. So my thought here was if the township isn't doing it, then I thought that we could have an intergovernmental agreement with, let's say, Glen Ellen that's out there real close to this property, and probably their residents get affected more than anybody else. Have them cut the property or cut the grass, send us the bill and we'll leave the property and do it just that way. And see if it could be done that way.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, but that would work if you knew which municipality to turn to.
Yeah.
There might be situations where you got a property and it's
I'm just.
closer to Glen
for
Ellen versus
example,
closer
because
somewhere, you
the
know, Glendale Heights. or
Post
whatever.
office gave this property a Glen Ellen resident, so I'm assuming Glen Ellen is close
No,
by.
no, I, for that one, it might work. I'm just saying as a general rule. Yeah, Mary.
I think we leave this with the townships, and it's up to the person complaining to contact the township, because we don't have the responsibility right now. I don't think we should take it on, and the municipalities are not gonna take it on. I live across the street from a house that's owned by a guy who might be maybe 40 and does not live there at all. The house is deserted. And several times a year, we call the village asking them to cut the backyard, which gets to be maybe 3-4 feet. And this is in downtown Glen Ellen. And they'll finally call the guy and he might come out and cut his lawn, but the parkway gets cut. So I think what we need to do here is just leave this to a situation. You may be annoyed at the appearance, but if it's not really impacting health or welfare, which, you know, unless it's turned into a dumping ground, which is a different story, or vermin where you've got actual health issue, I think we just let this go, especially in light of the fact that more and more, we're being told that the smarter ecological thing to do is to turn these yards. I have a half an acre. And in the last few years, I've actually increased the amount that's actually planted so that we have less lawn. So unless it's really hurting somebody, which, you know, it may be hurting your feelings, but if it's not hurting you individually, leave this with the townships and just, or, you know, they can deal with their neighbors themselves, but the township can deal with them, and they have a method. They can put the lien on. If the lien goes on, then that messes with the mortgage, insurance, et cetera. So I think we leave it alone.
Oh,
Yeah, just from experience, for 20 years, I was the one answering the questions on these. When people would call in to the Village of Lisle, I would get the grass complaints on this, so it's definitely a reactive thing. I know what they did there was they actually had to hire out a company and then they would bill them. And then that was how they did that, and that's something I think the county can do. My concern is, I know from Lyle Township, we don't have a weed person as far as I'm aware of. So I don't think there's anybody taking care of the weeds or the tall grass in our area. And I know we can say that nobody's bothered by them, but you sometimes get the wild animals in there and people put small dogs, and then you've got the coyotes living in there and things like that, so ticks. So it does
Well, crappy
become.
grass has a tendency to then go onto somebody next door who takes really good care of their lawn, and
Exactly.
then
I think we
So-
all that other
should,
stuff.
Scott's forced that program.
You know what? This is my yard. My neighbor's replaced her lawn 3 times since we've lived next to each other in 35 years. My lawn is complete clover.
Yeah, but
And my
you've
lawn
done it the right way.
But
You've
my
done it the
lawn
right way.
encroaches on hers. And we're still very good friends, but her lawn is perfect and my lawn is extremely imperfect. So how far do you want to get into
No, but
this?
it's not imperfect.
no, no.
It's not imperfect because
But
you
what if I want to
you're-
do that? What if I want to start, doing a lawn
just leaving
grass
it
thing?
alone and not doing
I have a
anything.
very wooded lot. I could do that.
Well, I guess it all depends on where you're at, but I mean, if you're looking at the typical, I know we've got
Yeah.
another meeting at 11, but if
I-
you're
I
looking at the typical, this house is here and this house is here, and this person is meticulous with their lawn for whatever reason, and then the guy next door just doesn't do anything for years, that will weigh on people, I'm sure. I mean,
True, but do we want to take that on as? our
no, I'm not really, I don't
don't
want to
think
do
so.
it, but
I don't
I'm
think so.
just, if we've got concurrent jurisdiction with the township and the township's not doing it, then I don't think we should be passing the buck. So,
Well,
yeah, I mean.
well,
township should
and
be
what we
doing their
could
job.
do, and what we
That's
could
our
do,
job too, because we have concurrent jurisdiction.
as long as we have concurrent jurisdiction and we have a clean and lean program, and we might have money coming in from IDA, which would help fund this. I think if we were to establish and continue to establish our relationships with the townships, to let them know when we get these complaints, and if the townships don't act on it, then enact our actions on it under not only our concurrent jurisdiction, but the clean and lean program, and fund it that way. I mean, it might take a little longer than the neighbors want, but at least we would be doing something and not passing the buck.
Paul, can you give us a list of townships that have ordinances and those?
Yeah. I will do that.
Okay.
And the one thing I want to see too, Paul, is there any payback for the services that are rendered? Because it's funny how if somebody doesn't cut their grass and they get a bill from a municipality because they didn't cut their grass, all of a sudden they're cutting their grass. So there has to be, some accountability to it too.
And that has happened across the street from me until it doesn't. And then they have to get building it, it is. what it
Vicious
is.
cycle.
That happens all.
Okay,
May I make
so
one
what,
quick
yeah, one
comment?
quick
I just
comment.
want to commend Mary for your clover lawn. I think more and more people are becoming aware that a traditional lawn is an environmental dead zone, and the chemicals required to keep that up are getting into our waterways and private wells. So I'd like to see people less pants on fire about a little extra growth
Unless
and
there's
things like that.
vermin or some real problem, so I think.
Okay, so Paul, you're gonna get us a list of those townships that have those, and then perhaps we can kick the tires on this at some point in the future
Yeah.
when we've got a less significant.
We don't have anything on.
agenda. Okay, does that work with everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, any old business, new business, without objection, we're adjourned. Thank you all.